What is the story of your worst date? Story 1. About 10-ish years ago, I went on a date with a coworker who seemed like a nice, low-drama kind of guy. He asked me to go out to a bar, and while I'm not a big drinker, I agreed. While I may not have been a big drinker turned out, he absolutely was. Guy got messy drunk to the point where he couldn't drive home. And since he had driven us there, it meant that I too was out of a ride home. This was pre-Uber days. And he was drunkenly adamant about wanting to walk home as he lived maybe 3 blocks away from the bar. I couldn't exactly force him into a cab, and his roommate was another coworker of ours, so I figured I'd help get him home and then asked the roommate to take me home. The bar was downtown, and to get to his house, we had to walk past the police station. And as we passed it, he stopped, started screaming about hating the cops, and ended up puking on the sidewalk outside the station, and then sat down on said sidewalk and refused to keep going because didn't feel good. I ended up leaving him there, finishing the short walk to his house, getting the roommate guy to take me home, and as we drove past the police station, the roommate stopped to pick him up. Guy laid down in the back seat crying and apologizing to me the entire ride back to my house. Roommate confirmed it was a pretty normal thing for the guy to get stupid drunk any given night. There was no second date and work was awkward for a while. Story 2. First, I ask what he does and says, I don't like to brag about my job. You know the fact that I save lives every day. He was a doctor, and he said that with no sarcasm. Dusra gets angry because he asked me out a dating app 5 years before our date and that I didn't respond to his message immediately. I tell him it was an old account I never logged into. He says, goes to show girls are so fickle, Moondrum. Admits he actually has strep throat and I actually shouldn't be on a date right now. Story 3. I was 19 or so sitting at a bus stop bench waiting for the bus to go to work. This stunning woman sits next to me. Not long after she starts talking to me, we have a pretty good conversation, and I build up the courage to ask if she'd like to meet up sometime at a nearby coffee shop. She says, yes. We agree on a day and time, then the last thing she says to me before I get on my bus is, it's a date. I go to the coffee shop at the agreed time and see she's already there. She has a male friend sitting right next to her. No big deal, I figure he must be there in case I'm a creep or something. I sit across from her and we order a drink. Then right away she says, so, what do you think about Jesus? And pulls out a pamphlet. I reply, I thought this was a date. She says something along the lines of, I didn't think you'd show up if it wasn't. I ended up leaving right away before she sees me tear up. Story 4. Back in college, I met this girl and asked her if I could take her out to dinner. She said yes. I was ecstatic. Well, then I had to figure out where to take her to give her an idea of who I am and what I'm about. So I tried to do something that was thoughtful. I've learned that there are 2 types of gifts, expensive and thoughtful. If you can't do expensive, which I couldn't, then you'd better go hard on the thoughtful. This was taking place in the U.S. South, but she was a freshman from Pennsylvania. I started thinking about things that be new and interesting to her. The answer came to me in a flash. Bojangles. I would take her to Bojangles. It's cheap. It used to have fairly decent food, but most of all it's Southern, and we'd be able to discuss regional differences in food and culture. Of course, it's also fast food. Really crappy fast food. The evening of the date arrived. I drove her to the place and talked all about fried chicken in the South and tea, and how it must be different from the North. We got there and ordered at the register, then moved down to pick up our tray of food. Fancy, huh? We waited and waited. I tried to make some small talk. You know, the small talk you make when something could interrupt your conversation at any moment. Then we waited some more and more. My dinner, fried chicken, was on the tray. The drinks were on the tray. Her sandwich was not. So we stood there with the silence growing more and more awkward. Minutes rolled by that felt like ages. Finally, an employee noticed us standing there and said, did you need something? I said yes, that we needed her sandwich. The employee turned around and grabbed the sandwich from the place it had been sitting. The whole time we'd been standing there and put it on the tray. It had been there since the beginning. Not a great start. I picked up the tray and started walking back to a table with her. But there was an issue. Bojangles used to have the best sweet tea, so I always got a large. The cups they use for the larges are the kind that are smaller at the bottom, so they'll fit in your cup holder in your car. That's great for a car, but not so great for balancing them on a tray. It fell over. Fortunately, it fell over onto the tray, but not before knocking her drink off of the tray onto the floor. She had gotten the smaller drink, which came in the waxed paper cup instead of the plastic cup that the larges are. That's important, because it means that when her cup hit the ground at about a 30-degree angle, the cup crushed and launched the liquid inside out like a cannon, onto her foot, drenching her in Pepsi or cola or some soft drink. Being gentlemanly, I went and got her a new drink, got back to the table and started trying to eat. I had ordered fried chicken, which I realized would mean that I had to eat with my fingers, which was stupid on a first date. Not wanting to look dumb, I decided I'd try to avoid eating with my fingers by using the plastic cutlery provided by the store, which would have been a fine idea if not for the fact that Bojangles only provides you with a spork. Not a fork, not a spoon, not a knife, a spork. A plastic spork to be exact. I'm trying to pry the chicken off the bone with this plastic spork and it's going nowhere. I can't get the chicken off the bone. I dug in a little deeper and really pulled, which bent the spork back, which served as a spring to launch my chicken ball across the table. I actually caught it before it could hit the floor. I remember thinking to myself, well, just enjoy this chicken because this date is going nowhere. I decided to just forget it and eat the dang chicken with my fingers. She was obviously not going to be going out with me, so I decided not to worry about impressing her. Just try to get out of the situation without looking any dumber than I already did. I reached down and pulled off a nice piece of chicken with my fingers. And I missed my mouth? Seriously. I jammed the chicken onto my face. I don't know how I missed it, but I did. I just missed. Which of course smeared chicken grease all over my cheek. The girl was looking at me like she was waiting for me to tell her, "It's just a prank, bro." I felt so dumb. We finished eating in silence. Finally, I said, "Well, let me take you back to your dorm." I gathered up all the trash on the tray, walked over to the garbage can, and accidentally threw the whole thing into the trash. All of it. Cups, the spork, napkins, the tray, all of it. I looked at the girl, she looked at me, and we both ran to the car. I've had some other bad dating experiences, but this one took the cake. I also remember being shocked when the car started when we were leaving. After the night I'd had, I was fully expecting to have to walk the several miles back to campus in the dark. Story 5. We were both broke, so we went walking around this cute, teeny tiny country town near us, and then got McDonald's to eat in the car so we could chat some more. He almost immediately starts pressuring me for close relationship because he bought me a cheeseburger, so I owe him, he says. He starts getting pushy, and I say, "Okay, but let's go get some rubber band from this gas station that's on the other of town." I drove for this date, so I take us to the gas station and tell him to go get the rubber band while I wait. I wait for him to get in the door and go a bit farther into the store before I drive off, leaving him stranded in this tiny gas station in the days before cell phones got popular, in a tiny country town with no bus service, no ride shares, and everything shuts down by 6 p.m. I know from mutual friends he made it home, but they already knew why he'd been ditched at the gas station, so no one cared about his poor whining about it. Story 6. Went on a date with a guy from Bumble. This date was so bad I have to put it in bullet point. He took me to a restaurant, and when the waitress asked for my order, he put his hand out to me off and said, "She'll have a salad." He got shots for us. My mother had just hospitalized after being hit by a negligent driver, which he was very aware of, and I told him I didn't want him driving under the influence. He took 2 shots anyway. When we get into the car, he puts on a gaudy gold watch. I asked why he was just putting it on now. He said, and I quote, "'Cause I gotta let him know." Yeah, let who know what? He got us front row tickets to a baseball game. I'm not into baseball. And wanted to be on the big screen, so he got on his seat and twerked every 10 to 15 minutes. He was in the Army, and his lead, not sure what his position was, my date just said he was a high-ranking person, happened to be sitting just a few seats down. I could tell he was judging my date for his outrageous behavior. When my date went to the bathroom, the 2 ladies behind me asked if I was okay and if I felt safe. If I felt safe. That should be very telling about how crazy my date was acting. He takes me to the beach after the game. He brought wine and a watermelon, but dropped everything. Not gonna hate on him for that, but NG, y'all. It was pretty funny considering how awful everything else was on this date. It was cold on the beach, so this man says, "You can put my hands on my chest," and proceeds to put my hands in his shirt on his chest. What the hell? He then tells me about all the girls he slept with at my university and told me if they were good or not, there was so much wrong with this date. He was convinced girls didn't date him because he was short. He was about 5 feet 4 inches. No, honey, girls don't date you because you're a shower. Edit. I left out quite a few other bad parts of the date, but thought of one more worth noting. A few days after the date, he sent me a video of him singing, poorly, and shooting off a gun using the gun as a beat against his desk. What screw went so loose in head that he thought this was alluring? Story 7. So like 8 years ago, I went out on a date with this dude. Went well, but then we both got busy and never had a second. Life happens. A few years later, we decide to do another date since we are both in more stable places in life. Date went well. Good food, good conversation, even went to the bedroom. Then during close relationship, he kept asking me if he could take off the condom and asked me to tell him I love you because it helps him get off. I insisted the condom stays, but I did give in to saying what he wanted so we could hurry up and finish. No more dates with him. Story 8. Dude stared at the chest of the woman at the next table the entire time. Looked like he hadn't showered in a week or more, and told me he cheated his way through college and into law school and had no friends. I had a friend call with a fake emergency and bolted. Story 9. I'd been talking to this guy and we finally decided to go on a date. He said he'd take me out for dinner and drinks. He offered to pick me up after work, so I said, okay. He sent me a text saying, we're on the way. I immediately asked who us we? Well, he's a single father and his sister was supposed to be watching his 4-year-old son. But something came up. Okay, I still went along with it. So he said he wanted to go home to shower first since he was in his work clothes. We got to his house and he showered and fell asleep for like 4 hours, while I to the sky out with his child who smacked me in the face twice. After I told him not to do that anymore, we ended up getting along and having fun. Turns out he's a sweet kid. He finally woke up and we ordered pizza. I took an Uber. I would have left before he woke up, but I didn't want to leave his kid alone. Story 10. Back in the days of MySpace, a guy contacted me. Wanted to meet up. Cool. Wanted me to pick him up. Not cool. I was young and didn't want a stranger in my car. He didn't like that. After going back and forth, he finally agreed to meet me at the mall. Perfect. I get there, and he's not there. I waited a bit before he showed up. He asked if I had been waiting, being polite and wanting to make a good first impression. I said no. He called me a liar. I was a bit taken aback, but I figured maybe it was his way of joking. At that age, I never gave anyone a chance. I would shut people out. I didn't want to do that. Throughout the date, he repeatedly told me I was lying. I was stupid. I was an idiot. And it was over stupid things. I thought Target closed at 9. He called me stupid and said it closed at 10. I finally had enough, told him goodnight, and left. He sent me a message over MySpace saying he was too spicy for me. I blocked him, and that was the end of it. Story 11. Met a girl off Tinder. She gave me a legit 20-question test on my life ambitions, university GPA, ethical views. Unfortunately, I passed. Took my dogs to her university campus and walked them together. Got naughty in the van. Ended with her crying on my lap telling me I'll never understand her. Her brother beat her up and her mom tried to stab her. It was our first date and we were 19. I hope she's doing okay. She was a nice gal. Just not what I was looking for as a 19-year-old on Tinder. Story 12. My worst date was a date I didn't realize I was on. I lived in Korea for a few years and wanted to practice Korean. I made an online ad asking for someone to help me with my Korean, and I'd help them with their English. Lots of people responded, and I to the sky out with them one by one looking for who was the best teacher and who I got along with. One of them wanted to meet in a coffee shop. I get there and meet her. She was super quiet and really awkward. She'd barely even look at me. I'd say something in Korean, and she'd respond in English. I asked her if we could talk in all Korean for a while and then all English later, and she simply didn't respond at all. Sometimes she'd just sit there quietly for a minute or two after I asked something, and I'd just change the subject. Eventually, I gave up and said I was leaving. She said she was leaving too then. As we're walking out, she asked if I wanted to get a beer now. I tried to say no as politely as possible. She asked when we could go out again, and that's when I realized she thought this was a date. A terrible, terrible date. On the plus side, I met my wife with that same ad. Neither of us thought that was a date, but we did eventually end up dating. Story 13. Got the friend call bail out one time. Girl had to go to the bathroom right in the middle of it, so I knew it was coming. Kept talking once she got back for a few minutes. Her story was rather impressive, though. She didn't stick with the "my friend needs help." She told me that a bus crashed and she had to get back to the hospital because there were multiple dead kids. That was interesting. Story 14. Went on a date with a man to a nice steakhouse. We only had drinks at the bar. We hit it off. He was cultured, handsome. Chemistry ran great. He even left the waiter a good tip. Important. So throughout the conversation we brought up candy and how we both breathe. So when the date ended, I offered him to breathe with me. We parked next to each other and so he got into my car and I started rolling up. As soon as I started rolling, he literally unzips and whips out his banana, grabs the back of my head, and starts to apply pressure, saying, "Just put your lips on it." I kicked him out of my car, texted him how messed up that was, and blocked him. Story 15. My first ever online date. We had been chatting on a dating website and agreed to meet at a cafe. I showed up about 15 minutes early. She calls me and says she is going to be a little late. I say no big deal. 25 minutes later, she calls me again and says she's going to be late as she locked herself out of her apartment. I wait and wait. At this point, it's an hour after the agreed-upon time. I see a woman who matched her picture enter the cafe. Before I can go up to meet her, my phone rings. I picked it up and she proceeds to shout at me, "Where the fudge are you? Is this some sort of prank?" I tell her that I am at a table in the back of the cafe. My first online date was informative as I learned why some women only post pictures of their face. She was extremely overweight. Furthermore, she was only in sweatpants and a sweatshirt. All this is minor compared to what happens next. After making some small talk, I ask her how her day was going. She asks if I really want to know. I mistakenly say yes. She launches into a rant about how she got fired from her last job because people were plotting against her. A new job she signed up for was just a scam that stole her credit card information. She just got out of an abusive, physical-only relationship. Her 25-year-old sister was abandoning the family to move to New York City. She was just kicked out of school because people said she was plotting to terminate someone. But she swears she wasn't. People are always plotting to get me, it seems. I was too frozen to leave at that moment and stayed for about another hour trying to make the most awkward small talk ever. Story 16. I was 15 and this guy asked me out on Valentine's Day. This would have been my first ever date, and I was excited. We've texted and talked a lot for the past 3 weeks, and had only met up twice since we were both from different schools. February 14 comes and I was so excited I came 30 minutes earlier than the agreed time. After 30 minutes, no show. I thought, okay, maybe he's just running a bit late. So I wait and even sent him a text twice asking where he was. 2 hours pass and still no show. I actually tried calling him, but he cannot be reached. I went home crying. That night he called explaining his friend dragged him to his house along with his group mates to finish a project. To be honest, I would have understood. But what really ticked me off was that he could have at least sent me a text telling me that he couldn't make it. That really put me off on dating. Story 17. Went to a small but popular place that wound up being packed. So we shared a booth with another couple. My date started hitting on the other guy, who responded. His date and I are rolling our eyes at each other like, when we left it had started snowing. Date slips and falls and then can't really walk. I'm carrying her down the sidewalk back to her house. She sees an SUV creeping by in the snow, about 3 to 4 inches by now, which is a lot for Virginia. Hobbles over and starts banging on the window asking for a ride. SUV nopes out. Carry her home. Fortunately, she was petite, although that probably contributed to low alcohol tolerance. Plus, it later turned out she was on antidepressants. Not a good combo. And I'm asking if she needs to go to the ER. I can call a cab. Didn't have a car. She starts yelling, just get out. I write down my number and tell her to call me if she needs to go to the hospital. And she flips to, you're just gonna leave? Then back to get out. Then flip-flops a couple more times. Finally, I escape. A week or two later, I go out with my roommate to a different place for a couple beers, and there she is at the end of the bar. I broke my leg. Big cast splint from ankle to hip. Said I hoped she got better quickly and we bolted. And no, I didn't wind up dating the girl from the other couple in the booth. Story 18. The girl lived in a different city. She was coming with her brother. She told me he'd leave quickly as he had things to do. Turns out they didn't know the city I lived in almost at all and wanted a guide around town. I don't have a problem. I can do that. I knew the guy didn't like me, so I kept my distance from her, but he didn't leave at any point. He was there during the whole thing. Near the end, she went in for a kiss, mouth full of Cheetos residue, and the guy puffed up, yo, get away from my sister, you creepy fudge. I'm like, sorry, so. I bounced. We met a few times after the fact, but we broke it off about a month after that. It was an odd day out, TBF. Story 19. Technically a breakup, but it happened on a date. Tried to break up with him in private in the car. He said he needed a pause on the conversation. Took us into a restaurant, then proceeded to burst into tears in front of everyone. Best bit is that a few weeks later, he came into my work pretending that we hadn't broken up, and I had to break up with him again, while he cried, in front of his sister who was my coworker. Story 20. I've had a few bad dates, but the worst would probably be this cute blonde from Tinder. We had texted for 4 days, and she seemed intelligent and interesting. We arranged to meet up at a karaoke bar for drinks, chatting, and maybe a little shared humiliation. I got there first and decided to wait at the bar. I'm chilling there, slowly sipping an old-fashioned, when my Tinder date rolls up and shouts, "Ooh, me God, are you Andy?" and shoves her tongue down my throat while I'm trying to answer. At this point, I'm thinking, okay, not a take-home-to-mom kind of girl, but we can probably have a bit of fun. I suggest we find a table, and she says, sure, let me just get a drink first. Tinder chick orders 4 shots of tequila, while I'm in the process of thinking to myself, starting our date by sharing shots. Ballsy. Nope. This tiny cute little girl slams all 4 shots in a row, like something from a sleazy 90s frat house. I was honestly reeling from this chaotic energy that just waltzed into my life like a flipping hurricane, but figured I would feel the situation out a bit more. She actually leveled off for a while, and we had some good laughs, if not entirely shallow conversation. Then it was time to do karaoke. She gets on stage and apparently decides to remix the song by singing it in offensively stereotypical bad accents and shouting all the owl slurs she knows. Like it might be trashy but borderline acceptable in a tight-knit group of friends where everyone is comfortable with each other. But I'm clearly from mixed ethnicity, and there's a diverse crowd in the bar, People are definitely looking around and getting upset. I heard a quick, yo, what the fudge, thinking maybe she was too drunk and needed reining in, but she waved me off and doubled down on her show and tell. This was the one and only date I've legitimately ran away from. I didn't even try to split the bill, just bolted and left her to deal with it. Another was this really sweet girl that desperately wanted to meet up near my place, so I took her to a bar I'm a regular at and friendly with the staff. We sit a chit-chat, and then the bartender I'm friendly with comes over to take our drink order. First, she orders a beer, but when my buddy jokingly asks her for some ID, she gets a little flustered and orders a cola instead. Then she says, I didn't think they'd check ID here. I'm not old enough to drink. Couple things. I was 27. Her Tinder profile said she was 23. I'm in Canada where the drinking age would mean she's still in high school. And I work for a school board, so even the accusation of spending inappropriate time with a minor would be an immediate termination. 5 years later, and that bartender still won't let me live it down.